Hello, I'm McIntosh, the founder, the visionary, and the servant leader emeritus of the Bahamas Constitution Party. Today I would like to introduce you to the mandate of the Bahamas Constitution Party and what it means for the Bahamian people and the future of our country. As a backdrop to the introduction of the Bahamas Constitution Party, I have worked since 1985 as a youth leader, as a youth organizer with an organization I founded by divine revelation called the National Committee for Youth Renewal and Revival. We started in September 1995, and over the course of the time we actually planned youth development programs and officially launched in April 11, 1996. Our theme, committed to the preservation of the next generation, was part of how we see we should go forward in developing the young people. Our work was quite extensive and aggressive in terms of the work we were doing in the nation, in terms of national youth development. And in fact, it got the eye of the government at the time, which is the F&M government, and they were of the opinion that it might have been politically motivated, although that was the furthest thing from our mind. But nonetheless, after the election in 1996, the F&M government really pushed at the National Committee for Youth Renewal, and within 6 months we demised and we had to close our program. It appeared that the work had died in infancy, and however we continued the work forward with the encouragement from the Lord that all the things that we had done over the last 2 or 3 years would not be for naught. And so in October 1997, having seen the demise of the National Committee for Youth Renewal, the Lord spoke to me. That was very interesting and changed the course of my direction at the time. The vision was to go to American University and that I would enter a special 6-month program, that He will send someone to help me and do not use me for me to call. At the time, I did not know where American University, but the second night I had the second dream that said that American University was in Washington, D.C. So I followed that instruction, and by the February 8th, I left Nassau on a wing and a prayer, I would call it, to head towards American University. It was a very interesting, most interesting faith walk of my life. In fact, it was the biggest faith walk of my life. But I left Nassau on a borrowed one-way ticket with $30 in my pocket. And by the time I reached American University the next day, the Lord had already made a way for me, because I had said, Lord, if you want me to go to American University, if you have something to say to me, then I'm leaving here with nothing, and you're going to have to open every door. And so He did. And I spent an entire 17 miraculous days of which the Lord provided every need for me. He sent someone, as He said in the vision, that He would send someone to help me. And by the end of those 7 miraculous days, the Lord decided to speak to me, those things that He wanted to. This is the mandate of the Bahamas Constitution Party. It began February 26, 1998, when I was awoken with a dream. The instructions was clear and concise. They were run 39 candidates under the banner of the Bahamas Constitution Party. Ask Christian men and women to make themselves available to serve, and go to Sir Lyndon and exact from him the original intent of the preamble of the Constitution. That was the vision that I had on February 26, 1998, that began the mandate of the Bahamas Constitution Party. As you may imagine, when I woke, I was very concerned about these instructions. And I, for several weeks, walked around the university very both amazed and in consistent wondering in regards to what this all meant. I had came to American University to study psychology, and that was my initial instruction, and that is what I came to do. But for several weeks, I was amazed. I concerned myself about how am I going to communicate this? What does this all mean for the Bahamas, and whether I should even follow through. But it is interesting, after several weeks, the Lord reminded me of a prophecy that I had from my then Bishop Dr. S.T. James in October 1987 that said that the Lord would do a magnificent and great thing through my life. And while he was not aware of what it was, he said that the Lord would reveal it to me when I enter an institute of higher learning. Well, that was 11 years before that time in 1998. So it took 11 years for me to actually enter this university, higher university. And in entering, this was the magnificent instructions that the Lord could give concerning the nation. And so I began to get very comfortable then with the instructions and began to make planning in regards to such an instruction. And so on the day of April 3rd, 1998, as I read during my devotion, the Lord began to speak to me concerning what he wanted for the nation. And I was reading Ezekiel chapter 40, and when he began to speak to me, the first 5 verses spoke clearly and concisely concerning my disposition in Washington, D.C. And these are the words which I will read for you. In the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the fall of the city, on that very day the hand of the Lord was on me, and he took me here. And the man said to me, Son of man, look carefully and listen closely, and pay attention to everything I am going to show you. For this is why you have been brought here. Tell the people of Israel everything you see. This was interesting to me because at that time, 1998 was the 25th year of our country's independence. And so what he was speaking to me is that he had sent a heavenly messenger to examine the Bahamas and to evaluate whether the nation was in compliance with this pledge of the Declaration of Independence. He noted that he had brought me to Washington to show me the things which I'm about to make known to you, and that I might make it something that warrants my earnest consideration to be kept close to my heart, and something that was important and urgent. And he wanted me to speak these things to the Bahamian people. I continued to read the scripture. It was interesting because it appeared to be very repetitious in regards to measuring windows and doors and spaces. And so I just continued to read because I wasn't sure exactly where we were going. But nonetheless, I continue to read. By the time as we get to chapter 43, the Lord really began to open up revelation to me that I knew came not from myself. It had to come in what I refer to as an interfacing with heaven and his revelation. If I may say in retrospect, in 1998, what was happening in the country was very interesting. First, the F&M had just been returned to governance less than a year before that, and they were in negotiations selling Patelco, the church, and the Bahamas Christian Council. And in addition to that, all the unions were up in arms with the government over labor relations, and so the country was in an uproar. At that time, I was in Washington, D.C., and the Lord was speaking to me concerning these things. And so the editor of The Guardian at the time, they were just coming online, wrote to me, because I've always been a columnist with The Guardian. And so they said, please, Ms. McIntosh, give us your response to what is happening. I'm not sure they were aware that I was in Washington, but this is what was happening. And my colleagues were on the ground in Nassau, waving the Constitution in the face of the government concerning what was happening with the gay ship issues. But you know, as the Lord began to speak to me, that was a very interesting concern. But when he began to speak, he talked about Linden Pindling. Well, remember, this was in the first vision. This was the instructions to go to Linden and find out from him what was the exact intention of the preamble of the Constitution. And as we began to talk about this revelation on April 3rd, 1998, I know a lot of times as we talk about revelation and what the Lord say, people are skeptical about that as we talk about it in the national life of the nation. But I want to comfort people in the fact that we have a divine God who is omnipotent, omnipresent, all-knowing, and his divine intelligence and divine wisdom obviously knows both past, present, and the future. And his speaking obviously gives us indication of things we do not know. in order that when we go forward, we are able to walk circumspectly based on what our past was. And as a nation, that is what the Lord began to reveal, so that as we speak, as we go forward, we would know those things that were not made known to us by those persons who were responsible. But that morning, the Lord really began to speak about the nation and about the leadership of the nation. And he began to talk about Sir Lyndon Pindling and the Prime Minister, Hubert Ingram. And he began to relate to me of a word touching, how the Prime Minister, Hubert Ingram, touched Sir Lyndon Pindling. And that this action of touching Sir Lyndon Pindling really displeased God to the extent that he had ceased to recognize the government of Hubert Ingram back in 1998. The Hubert Ingram obviously was not given the authority to eliminate Sir Lyndon Pindling from the political life, yet his action facilitated that. And what I mean by that is, in 1992, when the F&M won the government, Sir Lyndon maintained his seat in South Andros. The same thing happened in 1997. But after the 1997 general election, Hubert Ingram forced Sir Lyndon Pindling to resign his seat in order to get his pension. Well, having served for 25 years as the Prime Minister, obviously the pension was much deserving and it should have been given, but the Prime Minister forced Sir Lyndon to resign his seat in order to give. So this was a very disturbing thing for God in regards to the leadership of the Bahamas at the time. And Sir Lyndon Pindling had another assignment, not as the Prime Minister, but as the former leader and as God's servant in the nation for things that he was supposed to do. And so in this regard, that was a very difficult thing in terms of what happened, and God was not pleased by it. But the Lord began to speak to me regarding the past in the nation, this revelation. And he talked about that in the days of colonialism in the 1930s and 40s, that the people of the Bahamas cried unto him because of their mistreatment by their colonial bosses and the iniquitous situation that existed in the country for black people. And God said he heard their prayers, he heard their cries, and he took special note of what they were saying. In fact, our forefathers promised that if God gave them their land, if he gave them their freedom, if he gave them the opportunity to live with dignity in their own country, that they would do something special. And their special is that they would give him back the nation as a Christian nation, and they would give their children and the generations that follow as a pledge. Of course, that was exciting, because that was in keeping with what God wanted to do in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas in any event. And so having heard those prayers and those vows by the Bahamian people coming out of the 1930s and the 1940s, God began the process to deliver the Bahamian people. And he did so by raising up Sir Lyndon Pindling and the PLP and others like Sir Randall Fox back in the day to facilitate the answer to the prayer of the Bahamian people. Sir Lyndon Pindling was God's servant. Much as we talk about what his role was, but he was God's servant raised up at that time in order to free the Bahamian people from colonialism. It was in order to establish an independent Christian nation, which was to represent his purpose on the earth. As I said, we did not know, and our forefathers did not know what we were asking when we said, give us freedom and we will give you a Christian nation. But this was in line and keeping with what the Lord had in mind for these islands of the Bahamas. And so the Lord raised up Sir Lyndon, raised up the PLP, divinely raised them up to fight for majority rule, which they attained in 1967, and for independence in 1973, which was a direct instruction, and it was a direct plan in order to bring freedom to the Bahamian people. And so this accomplishment was an answer to the Bahamian people's prayer. They got what it is they want. Sometimes I recall that when we first declared majority rule, and in a holiday, the Dame Marguerite Pindling, which was the wife of Sir Lyndon Pindling and a mother in the nation, she spoke about how the Bahamian people felt before 1967. The fact that they was excited, they were happy about being able to accomplish something that would bring a new level of freedom to them as a nation. And so these things, as the Lord began to speak to me, was wide opening. And then he began to speak about the fact that in 1998, when he spoke about these issues, he said the nation was in breach of the contract that he made with those leaders. That he looked in the nation in 1998 and he do not see in the nation what is in the contract. And in a few minutes we will discuss what is that contract. But he said he was disgusted with national leadership for the sacred things that they moved away from the sacred things as was intended by the preamble of the Constitution, and they attempted to bring God's standard to their own. This is a very serious breach. This exercise, as he said, that began to happen in the nation and was happening in 1998, he insisted has permeated through the entire nation and has contaminated to a very great degree the entire society, including the church. He admonished us that the matter of our leadership or political leadership in the country needed to be reevaluated. And the fact that he referred to our leadership as kings and how the Bahamian people related to political leadership and how the Bahamian people had political leadership as supreme in their lives to the diminishing of the godly values and principles that he intended. And this breach also was equate to the idolization of political leadership within the nation. And so the call for righteous government was on the premises of those breaches, that we had gone away from the sacred things that was supposed to be, and that we should return to him in this regard. And as I referred to a scripture earlier, Ezekiel chapter 43, when we read it in verse 7 to 12, we will see specifically what he referred to. How the fact that we have to, as a nation, examine the preamble of the Constitution, which he ordered me to ask Sir Lyndon about, and that we should come back to the place of where that law, that contract that he has indicated in terms of the preamble of the Constitution would be something that would order how we govern, how we live as a people, how we order the nation, and how we protect the sovereignty, the inheritance of the Bahamian people and the children in which he spoke about, or which we had promised God that we will do. And so the law of the house, which was referred to in that scripture, when we talk spiritually, it's the law of God. It's one of the mandate of the Bahamas Constitution, that we get back to the place where we honor God in the society. And concerning the natural things, it's the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And if you read in the first chapter of the Constitution, it says that the Constitution is the supreme law of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And subject to the provision of this Constitution, which I hold here, if any other law is inconsistent with this Constitution shall prevail. And if the other law shall, to the extent of the inconsistency, be void. That was an interesting thing. It talked about the preamble of the Constitution, which was the contract made with the Bahamian people by God for giving them what they wanted. And what did they want? They wanted freedom. They wanted dignity. They wanted to live in their country in a way other persons who are free in other countries lived freely. And they asked him for it. And you know, when we look at the preamble of the Constitution, which I will read now, 25 years later from the time that we made the independence order for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas was in 1998. This is the time that we're speaking about. And the Lord sent his angels to examine the country and see whether the commitment made to the Bahamian people, to the government of the people, whether it was still enforced. That was a very serious mandate. He said, because he does not see in the nation the righteous principles articulated in the preamble of the Constitution operational in the governance of the nation. So it is his desire to see in the governance of the nation the values enunciated in the preamble of the Constitution. And of course, the preamble of the Constitution is a powerful mandate in which the Bahamas Constitution Party has as its primary mandate. And let me read it for you. Whereas 481 years ago, the rediscovery of this family of islands, rocks and keys heralded the rebirth of the new world. And whereas the people of this family of islands recognize that the preservation of our freedom will be guaranteed by a national commitment to self-discipline, industry, loyalty, unity, and an abiding respect for Christian values and the rule of law. Therefore, know ye therefore that we, the inheritors of and successors to this family of islands, recognizing the supremacy of God and believing in the fundamental rights of the individual, do hereby proclaim in solemn praise the establishment of a free, democratic, sovereign nation founded on spiritual values, in which no man, woman, or child will ever be slave or bondsman to anyone, or their labor exploited, or their lives frustrated by deprivation, and do hereby provide for these articles for the indivisible unity and creation under God of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. That is the preamble of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so what does the preamble imply? We've heard the revelation and what God intended for us to do based on our breach. But he says, but I'm now saying to you what the preamble means. The preamble is a binding contract in God's sight. The preamble pledge is a national commitment between God Almighty and the government and the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The preamble pledge commits God to us and us to him in a binding contract. The preamble denotes that the Bahamas is God's nation and we are God's people. This preamble pledge was solidified and sealed as a contract as a result of the significant achievement that we achieved as a government by majority rule in 1967 and independence in 1973. So what does God want as a result of that? He wants to govern the nation through men and women who will allow him to lead through them and with the principles and ideals for nation building as is articulated in the preamble. He wants the nation to return to our national commitment to serve him, which is articulated and recognized in the preamble of the Constitution. He wants his children back. He wants the children of the nation, which was part of the promise, to be returned in the same national fashion through educational, social, cultural, and spiritual pursuits. He wants his nation back. God wants his nation back for the purpose for which it was intended, to be a praise in the earth. And he wants us, the Bahamian people, to examine the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution, relative to the lives that we are living and the direction the government is taking the country. Regrettably so, the consequences of non-compliance is also very serious. That if he cannot govern the nation through men and women who will allow him to serve and take care of his people, he will judge the nation and take the nation back. And I think, according to what we're seeing, we are already under judgment. But I want to indicate, what does taking the nation back mean? A lot of people are concerned about that question. What does that mean? Let's look at the present dilemma in the nation. We have failed governance. We have failed political leadership. We have a failing economy. We look at the consistent downgrades, 4 in the last 5 years. We look at the foreign invasion of the economy. Not only foreign direct investment, but we are talking about the taking up of the economy in a great way by persons outside of the country. I think our biggest problem started when we removed the Immovable Properties Act and we put a Foreign Persons Ownership Act in the nation where foreigners can actually buy property outside of the bounds of Bahamian ownership. Let's also look at foreign invasion of the culture of the society. We are at the edge of a second round of colonialism as we see the level of penetration of the Chinese money and culture in the country. So we're 40 years of freedom outside of independence, and now what we're doing, we're looking back at Egypt's gate. I want to tell you, and we got to go back to having heard the revelation in 1998, what happened after that. My interaction with Sir Lyndon was immediately after that. I came home, I talked to him, I told him what it is we wanted to do. I went back to him and showed him what we were planning. And over the 2 years from 1998 to 2000 when Sir Lyndon passed, he spoke to me on quite several occasions. In fact, on the 10 weeks before he died, I did the last interview with him for radio or for audio tape recording of what he needed to say to me concerning the preamble of the Constitution. But during the time in my interaction with Sir Lyndon was very encouraging. He believed that to some degree, and he stated this emphatically, that the Progressive Liberal Party failed to accomplish what the original intent of the preamble of the Constitution outlined. He believed that. He also indicated that the country wasn't exactly what they intended to produce. They did a lot of things. We look at the central bank, we look at the defense force, we look at College of the Bahamas, we look at all of the things that were accomplished during the initial stages of the Progressive Liberal Party government. That was important for Sir Lyndon because we had to come into our own as a nation. But he said they did not still create the nation in the social, spiritual context that they wanted to. And he said at that time that the Free National Movement took the country even further into a more secular, liberal stance. That was a concern because that meant we would not get back. So he encouraged me to continue this work towards the Bahamas Constitution Party. You know, as he always loved the word 10, that if I can find 10 people to stand with me, continue to do this work. I was happy to hear the father of the nation encourage me to do this because he believed if we continue to do this, we would at least cause the nation to continue to think about the preamble of the Constitution. That's why I am constantly excited when I hear the national anthem played and the preamble of the Constitution recited after every time. That makes me excited that we are going in the right direction to bring the people to a knowledge of what it is God wants. But that interview that we had with Sir Lyndon in 2000, June 13th, he said some things that excite me about what we should think about. Sir Lyndon said these things. He said that the preamble is a statement of historical and psychological fact. It is a statement of historical achievement. The generation that brought about this was the inheritors of and successors to all who have gone before us. And the statement was a recognition of former Bahamians, a statement of fact that having gotten us this far, we pledge to go further. What it says is that we agreed to be bound by spiritual values in which every man, woman, and child could grow, having never to be slave or bondsman again, which recapitulated our history. We will be subject to no man, no matter where he comes from. Sir Lyndon continued, and these are his own words, those, in referring to the preamble of the Constitution, those are the principles the founding fathers thought had brought us to that particular point. These principles having brought us to that point, we recommend them to subsequent generations worthy of consideration. Because if they can bring one generation to this point and lead them successfully, perhaps they could do the same for subsequent generations and lead them successfully. These would have to be determined and practiced by every generation that follows. It means that the people themselves will demonstrate a desire to preserve their freedom and offer the guarantee. And how serious they are in that will be determined by their commitment to self-discipline, industry, loyalty, unity, and their respect for Christian values and the rule of law. In other words, said Sir Lyndon, the Bahamian who thinks that somebody is going to come along and do all the work for them and he's going to reap all the benefits, it is not going to happen. He will lose his freedom in the process. He is going to have to go out and by his own self-discipline, loyalty, industry, and unity, guarantee the freedom that he wants to have in place in his own country. Sir Lyndon obligated the government to uphold the core values of the preamble in the governance of the nation. And he says, it is very important that the things that the government do and how they do it give high priority to these areas. The government can't expect to succeed if it is not going to abide by the rule of law. It's absolutely fundamental. If you abandon the rule of law, you introduce anarchy, and that negates the very first point of self-discipline. It's already enshrined there. All the policies and programs of the government should be those that enhance self-discipline, industry, loyalty, unity, and respect for Christian values and the rule of law. And if the policies and programs detract from those things in any significant and material way, we will erode and will subsequently lose our freedom. Those are the words of Sir Lyndon. In echoing the collective sentiments of the Founding Fathers, Sir Lyndon noted that in following the values in the preamble, it would be difficult for the nation to falter under such virtuous practices. Those were the principles that guided the Founding Fathers in the establishment of the new nation. And it was our hope and desire that it would be the guiding feature for future generations and future governments. That was the word of Sir Lyndon regarding the preamble of the Constitution. What is so interesting, that the morning of August 26th, when Sir Lyndon died, I had a dream. This was 10 weeks after we spoke, and that was the last time that we had spoken. I dreamt that we went to a place that was Sir Lyndon Pendling building. And when we got there, the place was shabby, needed repair and painting. And the person who was our tour guide suggested that this is Sir Lyndon Pendling. And we thought that it should have been better kept. Nonetheless, it was. She showed us the first apartment, and then the second, and then the third. When she opened the third door, she said, "This is Sir Lyndon's personal apartment. He just left." When I looked inside, it was neat and clean, royally furnished. But clear water was leaking through the roof onto the carpeted floor, and the carpet and curtains was faded by the sun. It showed age. When I went and pushed my way in and went inside, there was a photo of him and I on the fireplace. Hundreds of photos were on the floor next to the mantel. But there was a small table on the right with hundreds of photographs of Bahamian children. And while I was musing over the fact that of all the photographs he could have used, he used the one with him and I, the tour guide alerted my attention to the small table and said, "He left them for you." At that moment, the phone began to ring, and I answered it. It was somebody saying to me, "Turn on the TV, Sir Lyndon is dead." That was amazing to me. For many days and weeks, I pondered over what that meant. But it is interesting that of all the days and all the interaction I had with Sir Lyndon, he never sent me a message. He always said to me himself, he always called me, wait to the phone for me to hear it. And so it was interesting of that dream, that while he was gone, he let me know that he was gone, and that this was the work that we should carry on. But Sir Lyndon referred me to Arthur Folkes, the governor, the former governor of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Arthur Folkes, who was the person who penned the preamble of the Constitution. And Sir Arthur Folkes, like Sir Lyndon, agreed with some of the sentiments regarding the preamble of the Constitution. These are some of the words from my interview with Sir Arthur Folkes in September 2000. Sir Arthur Folkes said, "The Constitution was not meant to be just a lifeless piece of paper, but a living thing representing who we are, how we agree to govern ourselves, and the basic law of what makes us Bahamian and what defines a Bahamian." According to Sir Arthur, the legalistic language needed something poetic to express the aspiration of the Bahamian people. It needed to be upfront, and he referred that the preamble of the Constitution represents those aspirations of the Bahamian people and their recognition of those values. Sir Arthur Folkes told us that being a Christian nation, obviously, that our belief in Jesus Christ, and the fact that he believed that the recognition of and our obligation to the preamble is what makes the Bahamas a Christian nation. It is, in his opinion, and these are his words, the view does not lead to theocracy, but it does lead to the observance and respect for Christian principles within the governance of the nation. He said, modern Christianity acknowledged the rights of others to exist and have their own religion. In that sense, having a country tolerant of all religions, where freedom of conscience is maintained and each person's having access to information and making up their own mind, that is what is Christianity. That is what it is all about. And he feels that democracy, from which most society evolved, is based on Christianity. This view gives way to tolerance for freedom of religion within the country. Christianity being the principal religion today. He believes, Sir Arthur, that the church should fully recognize the role. The government should fully recognize the role of the church and see the church as a partner in working for God's people. The church doing the spiritual side and the government doing what makes for prosperity and peace to enable the people to flourish and prosper in material and spiritual things. While he said he does not believe in Christian or non-Christian as relates to persons involved in national leadership, but when making their judgment, these are his words, that must be a great part of their thinking, a part of their being. Government, he says, should not go out and draft a law or legislation that is non-Christian. Government must create an environment that encourages and allows Christianity to flourish and the freedom of religion to exist. And although the preamble does not have the force of law, as the other articles, he said, those articles should reflect the preamble as an evolutionary yet perpetual thing. He feels strongly that if the words of the preamble changes, the principle should not. And so he notes that in a democratic society, when a government ceases to do what they are supposed to do in governing the people in the way the people have agreed to be governed, that the people must exercise their franchise and remove that government from power. These are the words of Sir Arthur Folkes, the man who penned and authored the preamble of the Constitution. I wish to summarize what I think that the founders wanted. And they wanted, I believe, that they wanted a high standard of personal morality for the persons leading the nation. I believe that they wanted the role of the church, spiritual and Christian leadership to be an integral part of the nation building and their influence to be vital in the formation of public policy. I believe that the founding fathers of the nation also believed that the integrity needed for national leadership directly relates to the recognition and belief in the fundamental rights of the individual, and the aspiring leader has to have a commitment to upholding and protecting these rights for all the citizens of the country. And finally, I believe that the founding fathers also believed that the freedom of the Bahamian people could only be guaranteed if those people who govern the nation maintain a belief in the supremacy of God and have the core values of the preamble of the Constitution as part of their core value as to how they move forward. And therefore, we see the Bahamas Constitution Party. We know in an election the people have a choice, but God has a plan. What is God's plan? Righteous government, Christian leadership to be part of it. This is not just a good thing, the Bahamas Constitution Party. It's a God thing. And therefore, we have put ourselves forward to do the will of the people. So when we talk about righteous government, we talk about order as a premise of righteousness. Righteousness is simply doing the right thing, doing things right, and doing it for the right reason, a combination of right actions. Righteousness is seeking justice for the poor, equity for the marginalized, and equality for those discriminated against. Righteousness in governance is providing God's principles, God's ideas, God's way of doing things in the governance of the nation. Of course, the Bible speaks and says righteousness exalts a nation, and sin is a reproach to any people. And when the righteous is in authority, the people rejoice. And when the wicked bears rule, the people mourn. And therefore, righteous agenda for the Bahamas is based on going forward with things as relates to public policy. So we propose the following in the Bahamas Constitution Party. Much needed constitutional reform towards constitutional democracy, which is a republic system of governance. Widespread public policy review with ethics laws that determine how we operate and how we create public policy. Consistent legislative revisions for crime, education, and in fact, reordering of the entire society. New, bold, economic diversification ideas, creating industries, utilizing the development of the natural resources in the country, and also the individual empowerment of all citizens through small, medium-sized businesses, and encouraging these things to happen by Bahamian ownership. The mission statement of the Bahamas Constitution Party speaks a lot to how we will go forward. We pledge that with the help of God, we will solicit and draw from the abundant resources, talented, and expertise of the Bahamian people to assist with the governance of the nation. We vow to put Bahamians first and to make available every opportunity for the advancement of our citizenry. We will honor, revere, and respect our elders while committing ourselves to the preservation of the next generation of Bahamians, ensuring that they continue to be a free people living as first-class citizens in the land of their birth. The philosophy of the Bahamas Constitution Party speaks to the supremacy of God, speaks to the equality of all Bahamians, but Bahamians having first preference in their country. It speaks to the vital resources of the nation as its people and the fact that we should develop them with the greatest potential. It speaks to the democracy of the wishes of the majority of the people, but also the meaningful consensus of the minority. It speaks to integrity, more noble than expediency. It is never negotiable. So integrity must be the primary force of a BCP government and a government in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. For every potential is tremendous. The Bahamian people's potential is tremendous, and we must vigorously pursue and encourage it by education, opportunity, and affirmation. And we determine that the greatest leader is one who serves. It is the principle of servant leadership on which we talk about. The objectives of the nation is we must encourage and review and revive the spirit of the Constitution in the hearts of the residents. We must educate Bahamians all across the nation. These are the objectives of a Bahamas Constitution Party government, to highlight and revitalize the principles of a Christian nation, which is supported by the preamble of the Constitution. Also to make government accountable to this preamble and the moral obligation to promote the principles stated therein with its core values, and its responsibility to preserve the freedom and fundamental rights of all the inheritors and successors to this island of the Bahamas. Also to take this governance of the nation, put it back in the hands of the people and God who gave us such a nation, and to produce an environment in the country where young people feel there is opportunity and hope for them, ensuring that the plight and development of the young people becomes the primary mandate of our government. This is what we are all about. I believe that the Bahamas is out of time. I believe that we are in a place where we have infringed on time as relates to how we should respond to what it is and our obligation to the preamble of the Constitution. At this point in 2017, as we prepare for general elections, we talk much about Moses and much about Joshua. And we think about finding a man who will lead the charge, a man who will be Joshua. But no man is Joshua. The Bahamas Constitution Party is Joshua. We are the Joshua generation, and the instruction, the mandate, is what gives Joshua the authority to operate and possess the land, to share the inheritance, the original promise from Moses. Joshua didn't have something different from Moses. His promise was the same thing. And so I wish to tell you, Moses, the BCP mandate is delegated authority. The specific instructions give us the authority to operate. We went to Moses through Celinda, and he told us what to do, what he was to do, and what he had failed. And he says, carry on this thing. Take the Bahamian people into the promised land, and that is our mandate. We have delegated authority. Moses is dead. That also gives Joshua delegated authority. The instructions in 1998, the confirmation in 2012, Moses is dead. The PLP is Moses. Moses is dead. The FNM is Moses. Moses is dead. The prophecy of Dr. Miles Monroe in 2014, prior to his death, speaks to the transfer of the baton from the Moses generation to the Joshua generation. For new leadership, new mentality for a new Bahamas. That is where we are. The matter of delegated authority for the further development of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, the new Bahamas of which we speak. If I may say to you, according to Joshua chapter 1, the scripture says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give you. And I will give you every place where your feet that walk. The assurance is for Joshua. The delegated authority is, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. The victory is assured based on our delegated authority in the Bahamas Constitution Party. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law that my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have not I commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. That is the mandate, the delegated authority of the Bahamas Constitution Party. It is a righteous agenda, fighting for the soul of the nation. And of course, we know, as was in the days of Moses and Joshua, there was always the spirit of Korah and Achan threatening the survival of the pursuit. And even now, it threatens the survival of the pursuit of the new Bahamas. The attempts to steal the agenda, to go off with these things, they are obstructionist ideas. But the recent PLP leadership fight was meant to kill the BCP message, as you see. But we know that through God we shall do valiantly. And so we come to you. I did not choose this agenda. It chose me, both timing and purpose. For when a nation is in crisis of order and leadership, God always calls a woman not necessarily to lead, but bring order back by the birth of a new agenda. Women represent the type of the church, the bride of Christ. Because we speak of righteous government, then who will lead it except the church? A woman represents the church in both type and symbol. And so the duty of a woman in a house has always been, what does she do? She takes care of the children, she orders the household, the atmosphere, she takes care of the children, and she always sees about the protection of the inheritance of her children. So I have come to see about my children. And women having led in times before and God having spoken and given them mandate, it's clear in the Bible. We look at Deborah in the book of Judges when she said, village life ceased until I, Deborah, arose a mother in Israel. And I think that too is my role, a mother in Israel, to birth a new Bahamas. And as I judge, my son Barak, our new leader, Colin Miller, will lead the charge into the fight. And then we think of other women like Esther in Esther chapter 3, who says, who can tell if I've come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And if I perish, I perish. But we must birth a new Bahamas. And then we look at Mary, the mother of Jesus, a young woman facing death by stoning. Lord, be it unto me according to thy will. She knew what would happen to her if she was found pregnant without a husband. But yet she went forward knowing that was the will of God. And then we have a sad point of Rachel, even now, weeping, crying, refused to be comforted because they could not be found. Children, even now, dying on our streets in numbers beyond. And that is the place where we are crying for our children, because the nation is under siege, under judgment. But I want to say that the courage of these women and many more, too numerous to mention, speaks volume to going forward in spite of dangerous circumstances. All of them could have lost their lives. They could have had a different account, but their faith carried them through. And certainly my faith for 19 years to carry this agenda, to bring it to this point where the nation now says, this is our time. That my faith has carried me through. We even look at women in the nation, in the world, modern history, women who have led to bring agenda to the nation. Golda Meir, a prime minister in Israel in the late 1960s. She saw her nation through war and victory. We look at Benazir Bhutto from Pakistan, who took over after her father. I met her one time in 1998. When we look at Margaret Thatcher, called the Iron Woman, she negotiated many of the most important treaties in the Commonwealth for modern England, becoming the first woman to chair the G8 of nations. We look in the Caribbean in the 1990s, Dame Eugenia Charles in Dominica, representing her people at CARICOM. and Germany's first female chancellor, Angela Merkel, who also chaired the G8 of nations after her Christian Social Union and Christian Democratic Union Party won the election with a coalition in parliament. We also see in 2006 victory of the PNP, Portia Simpson Miller, becoming the first female prime minister of Jamaica. And we have in the Bahamas women who have come close. People like the Honorable Janet Bostwick, Mother Cynthia Pratt, the Honorable Cynthia Pratt, and the Honorable Atalia Johnson, who was the Speaker of the House, Dame Joan Sawyer, and many more, hundreds of Bahamian women excelling, including my mother and yours, of excelling and educating the nation. So you ask whether women can lead, or whether we can win, or whether we can even bring to the nation that which will cause victory. Well, we can. We are few and far between, but once in every generation, God raises up a woman. Then it is His time to choose whether He calls her forward. But I want to tell you, in this agenda and mandate of the Bahamas Constitution Party, that I take the words in closing of the national anthem that says, "Lift up your head to the rising sun, Bahamaland. March on to glory, your bright banners waving high. See how the world marks the manner of your bearing, pledged to excel through love and unity, pressing onward, march together to the common loftier goal, steady sunward. Through the weather hides the wide and treacherous shore, lift up your head. To the rising sun, Bahamaland, till the road youth trod leads unto your God, march on, Bahamaland. Certainly, we, the people, have an opportunity to anew and imagine the future that our founding fathers worked towards, they built towards, they wrote for us to do. And we carry this on in the Bahamas Constitution Party. And so I tell you, the people have a choice. During the next few weeks and months, we will be called to vote for a government. You have a choice, but God has a plan for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so I invite you to join us, stand with us, to bring about the new Bahamas, fresh, bold ideas, so that we can inherit the country left for us by our God and our forefathers, us, Bahamian people. And so in closing, I wish to say God bless and keep safe the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.